My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 31 years old, and 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I discovered that my family had been seated beside the kitchen doors at my own wedding. Every time a server pushed through, the doors nearly struck my father's chair. My mother was holding her place card with both hands, pretending she wasn't hurt, while relatives from my fiancé's side occupied the front tables marked "Honored Guests." I marched across the ballroom and asked my future mother-in-law why the bride's parents had been hidden in the back. She looked directly at my mother and answered loudly enough for 3 nearby tables to hear. We didn't want them embarrassing the important guests. I waited for my fiancé to defend them. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks and shrugged. "It's not a big deal, Olivia. Don't ruin the day over a table." That sentence ended something inside me. I looked at the man I was minutes away from marrying and realized he wasn't surprised. He already knew. I didn't cry, argue, or beg anyone to move my parents. I walked straight to the DJ booth, handed the DJ my phone, and asked him to stop the music. Then I requested access to the ballroom screens. My future mother-in-law's smile vanished when she saw the first document appear behind me. My fiancé rushed forward, but he was already too late. I took the microphone and announced that the wedding plans had changed. By the next morning, the video had spread across town. 3 powerful families had withdrawn their support from my in-laws, and the man I almost married was standing outside my parents' home asking me to save him. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked away from that altar, tell me, what time is it where you are? Where are you watching from? And what is the weather like there? Does it match your mood today? I'm curious to see how far this story travels. To understand why that table ended my engagement, you need to know it was never just a table. My fiancé's name was Daniel Vaughn, and his mother, Margaret, had spent the 18 months of our engagement testing how much disrespect I would tolerate before objecting. Daniel's family owned commercial properties across the county, donated publicly to local causes, and appeared in photographs at nearly every hospital fundraiser or business gala. My parents, Henry and Jessica Carter, owned a small heating and appliance repair company. My father still answered emergency calls himself, while my mother handled the accounts from a narrow office behind the workshop. They were not influential in the way Margaret defined influence, but they had paid employees during slow months, repaired furnaces for elderly customers who could not afford the bill, and helped young technicians earn certifications. When Daniel first met them, he said he admired how grounded they were. Margaret called them simple. The first time, I convinced myself she meant sincere. By the 5th time, I knew exactly what she meant. My parents offered to contribute to the wedding because they had saved for it since I was a teenager. I suggested a smaller ceremony, but my father said he wanted to give me one day when I did not need to calculate every dollar. They paid the venue deposit, catering, photography, music, and most guest accommodations. Their contribution reached $82,400. I added $26,000 from my savings. Daniel and Margaret selected expensive flowers and paid $7,800 toward them. Despite that, Margaret told everyone her family was hosting the wedding. She gave an interview to a local society website about combining 2 distinguished families and acted as though my parents were fortunate to be included. Whenever I corrected her privately, Daniel asked me to let it go. "Mom cares too much about appearances," he would say. "It doesn't hurt us to let her enjoy the attention." But it did hurt us. Every lie gave her more control. She removed my mother from planning meetings because she said too many opinions would delay decisions. She asked my father not to wear the brown suit he had bought because it looked too much like something a salesman would wear. At our engagement dinner, she moved my parents from the center table after a state senator accepted an invitation. When I protested, Daniel promised it would never happen again. I believed him because I loved the man he was when we were alone. In private, he was thoughtful and patient. In front of his mother, he confused silence with peace. Whenever he failed to speak, I created excuses for him. 3 weeks before the wedding, our coordinator, Mara Ellis, sent me a seating chart draft. My parents were at table 2 beside Daniel's father and closest relatives, exactly as Daniel and I had approved. 4 days before the ceremony, Mara called and asked whether I had authorized a priority revision. She forwarded a spreadsheet Margaret had sent. Guests had been divided into categories. Category A included donors, executives, officials, and wealthy family friends. Category B contained colleagues and distant Vaughn relatives. Category C contained most of my family. Beside my parents' names, Margaret had written, "Service-adjacent table preferred. Keep away from primary photography angles." I stared at those words until my eyes hurt. Daniel found the spreadsheet open on my laptop that evening. When I asked whether he had seen it, he hesitated before saying his mother was only managing the room efficiently. I told him service-adjacent meant beside the kitchen. He promised to correct it. "You're marrying me, not my mother," he said. "Trust me to handle her." I made him promise that my parents would be treated with respect. He looked me in the eyes and agreed, but his voice sounded rehearsed. On the wedding morning, Mara messaged me again. Margaret had arrived before the staff and personally replaced several place cards. Mara objected, but Daniel told her not to involve me because he did not want me getting emotional before the ceremony. Attached were photographs of the changed chart, Margaret's instructions, and an email Daniel had sent at 7:14 that morning. His final sentence read, "Olivia will be upset for a few minutes, but once the guests arrive, she won't risk making a scene." That email was the document I handed to the DJ. Until I saw my parents beside the swinging kitchen doors, part of me hoped there had been a misunderstanding. Then Margaret called them an embarrassment, and Daniel dismissed it as no big deal. Every warning rearranged itself into one undeniable truth. Daniel had not failed to protect me from his mother. He had helped her calculate how much humiliation I would accept. I thought about the future I had imagined. If my parents could be hidden at my wedding, where would they sit at my child's birthday? If I stayed silent, what lesson would I teach my future children? I stopped asking how to save the wedding and began asking why I was still considering marrying him. The DJ lowered the music, and the ballroom fell silent. Some guests smiled, assuming the bride was about to make a sentimental speech. Margaret did not smile. She had recognized the spreadsheet on the screens. Daniel reached the booth and ordered the DJ to shut everything down, but the DJ looked at me. The contract was in my name. "Keep it on," I said. Daniel grabbed my wrist below the booth. I removed his hand and told him never to touch me that way again. That was when several guests realized this was not a planned wedding surprise. I raised the microphone. "Good afternoon. Before the ceremony begins, I need to correct a misunderstanding about today's guest list." I pointed toward the screen. Some of you were identified as important guests. Others were categorized according to income, occupation, family background, and usefulness to the Vaughn family. Conversations erupted. People turned toward the tables near the kitchen. My parents remained seated, not because they were weak, but because they did not know whether standing would make things harder for me. I asked them to come forward. My father shook his head slightly, warning me not to sacrifice my future for his pride. Even while being insulted, he was trying to protect me. My parents were assigned to a table beside the kitchen because my future mother-in-law did not want them embarrassing the important guests. Those were her exact words. When I asked the man I was supposed to marry to defend them, he said it was not a big deal. Daniel stepped closer and said we needed to speak privately. I held the microphone between us. "Did you know about the seating change?" He looked at the screen, the guests, and then his mother. "This isn't the right time." "Did you know?" I knew she had concerns. "Did you send the email predicting I would be upset but would not risk making a scene?" He said nothing. The second screen displayed his message. The atmosphere shifted. Until then, people could tell themselves Margaret had acted alone, and Daniel was merely overwhelmed. His words removed that excuse. I heard someone near the front whisper, "He knew." Margaret pushed between the tables and demanded the microphone. "This is a private family issue. Turn those screens off. You made it public when you humiliated my parents in front of everyone." She accused me of manipulating the situation and insisted the chart was based on logistics. I pointed toward the note beside my parents' names. What logistical purpose is served by keeping the bride's parents away from photography angles? Margaret turned toward the room and claimed she had spent months protecting the elegance of the event. She said certain relatives did not understand formal expectations. I asked what she believed my parents might do to embarrass her. She looked toward my father's work-worn hands and my mother's handmade wrap. "They don't know these people," she said. "They wouldn't know how to conduct themselves." My mother stood. She did not raise her voice. "We know how to treat people kindly. I thought that was the most important form of conduct." Her words silenced the room. I changed the screen again, displaying the invoices. There has also been confusion about who hosted this wedding. My parents paid $82,400. I paid $26,000. The Vaughn family paid $7,800 for flowers they selected. Guests turned toward Margaret. She had personally told many of them that the Vaughns financed everything. I was not exposing the amounts to shame anyone for paying less. I displayed them because Margaret had used my parents' sacrifice to strengthen her reputation, while hiding them from the people enjoying what they had purchased. Then I made my announcement. "There will be no wedding ceremony this afternoon." Daniel's face lost all color. Margaret shouted my name, but I continued. "The meal has been paid for. The staff have worked hard and many of you traveled here. Anyone wishing to stay is welcome. However, this event is no longer a Vaughn wedding. It will be a dinner honoring Henry and Jessica Carter and a fundraiser for vocational scholarships, supporting young people entering skilled trades and hospitality work. The head table will be removed. No one here will be ranked by income, title, or usefulness." Daniel reached for the microphone. "You cannot cancel our wedding in front of everyone." I looked at him. "Would you still want this marriage if protecting me required disappointing your mother?" His mouth opened, but no answer came. I had spent 18 months interpreting his hesitation generously. I was finished translating silence into love. Margaret called my announcement childish revenge. I told her revenge would mean doing to her what she had done to my family. I was not placing her beside the kitchen or ordering the photographer to avoid her. I was simply refusing to marry into a family that required my parents to disappear. I asked Mara to bring 2 chairs to the front. As my parents walked toward me, guests moved aside. Some applauded. Others remained frozen. The most powerful reaction came from the people Margaret had labeled important. They had just discovered their invitations had been used as weapons against everyone she considered beneath them. Margaret climbed onto the platform and told everyone I was having an emotional breakdown. Her strategy was familiar. If she could not disprove the evidence, she would discredit the person presenting it. She said brides became overwhelmed, misunderstandings happened, and a mature woman would have handled the issue privately. As she spoke, memories flashed through my mind. At our engagement dinner, my father arrived early and Margaret handed him her car keys because she assumed he was the valet. My mother once offered to sew fabric favors for the tables, and Margaret replied that handmade decorations would make the reception look inexpensive. After every insult, Daniel asked me not to overreact. Standing before those screens, I understood that privacy had never protected family harmony. Privacy protected Margaret from consequences. I told the room I had handled concerns privately. I had spoken to Daniel after the engagement dinner, the dress fitting, Margaret's removal of my mother from planning emails, and the first seating revision. Every private conversation ended with a promise. Every promise lasted until Margaret wanted something else. How many private conversations does a woman owe people who keep repeating the same public disrespect? I asked. When does patience stop being maturity and become permission? Daniel's father, Victor Vaughn, rose from his table. Margaret ordered him to sit down, but he walked forward. Victor was not warm, and I had never been close to him. He usually allowed Margaret to speak for both of them. I expected him to defend her. Instead, he asked Mara whether the email on the screen was authentic. She confirmed it had come from Margaret's account, and that Daniel approved the final arrangement that morning. Victor looked at his son. You saw her parents beside the kitchen and allowed it? Daniel said he had been trying to prevent conflict before the ceremony. You prevented conflict for yourself, Victor replied. You handed it to your bride. Margaret told Victor not to embarrass the family. You have used that word all day, he said. Perhaps we should discuss what has actually embarrassed this family. He admitted that Margaret had told friends the Vaughns were financing the wedding and confirmed that their only direct contribution had been the flowers. Then he revealed something I did not know. Margaret had asked the Vaughn Family Foundation to reimburse $18,000 in design, media, and hospitality expenses connected to the wedding. She represented the reception as a donor development event, claiming Daniel and I had agreed to promote the foundation. A woman at table 1 stood so quickly that her chair fell backward. Her name was Evelyn Price, chairman of the foundation board. She said she had approved preliminary spending for a community fundraising reception, not decorations for a private wedding. She asked Margaret whether foundation money had paid for the ballroom. Margaret refused to answer and called the discussion inappropriate. Evelyn looked at the invoices and asked Mara whether she had copies of the decoration contracts. Mara said she did. She had preserved every instruction because Margaret repeatedly changed arrangements and blamed staff members when problems followed. The conflict was no longer between my family and Daniel's. It was between people who wanted the truth examined and those who wanted the ceremony to continue as though nothing had happened. Margaret moved closer to me. You have destroyed Daniel's future because your parents couldn't tolerate one inconvenient table. My parents tolerated the table, I answered. I did not tolerate what it represented. She said people like my family never understood the sacrifices required to build a respected name. Do those sacrifices include using charity money to decorate your son's wedding? For the first time, fear appeared beneath her contempt. Daniel had once told me Margaret grew up poor, moved frequently, and wore second-hand clothes. She had spent adulthood escaping every reminder of that childhood. Instead of developing compassion for people judged by income, she had joined those doing the judging. My parents threatened her because they lived modestly without shame. They proved dignity could not be purchased. Understanding her motive did not excuse her actions. It only made them clearer. Margaret demanded that security remove me from the platform, forgetting that I had signed the venue contract. The manager informed her that only Mara or I could request a guest's removal. A few people laughed, and Margaret's control slipped further. She looked at Daniel, expecting him to restore order. He stepped toward me and said, "Take the screens down, apologize for making this public, and we can still save the ceremony." His words answered the final question. Even after watching my parents be humiliated, his greatest concern was not what had happened. It was that other people had seen it. I asked Daniel what he expected me to apologize for. He said I had blindsided him, damaged his family's reputation, and transformed a seating disagreement into a scandal. I reminded him that he approved the chart, concealed it, and predicted I would remain silent once the guests arrived. He claimed the email had been taken out of context. What context would make it acceptable? I asked. He had no answer. Instead, he leaned close. "Come outside with me right now, or this relationship is over." Perhaps he believed the threat would frighten me into obedience. 2 hours earlier, it might have. Standing beside my parents, I realized the relationship he threatened to end had already ended when he decided my dignity mattered less than his comfort. I removed my engagement ring and placed it in his palm. Then let this be the first honest decision we make today. It's over. My mother covered her mouth. My father stepped closer, not to stop me, but to make sure I could stand. Daniel stared at the ring. You're throwing away 6 years over one mistake. This was not one mistake. It was a pattern, and today you proved it would continue after we married. Margaret stepped forward. Do not let her speak to you like that. She has been looking for an excuse to take our money and humiliate us. The invoices were still glowing behind her. Which money? I asked. Someone near the back called out. Her family paid for the wedding. Another guest demanded that Margaret apologize. A third asked whether foundation money had funded the flowers. Phones had appeared throughout the ballroom. One of my cousins had been live streaming for relatives unable to attend. The photographer's assistant had recorded the confrontation because she believed it might become evidence in a contractual dispute. Guests were already sharing clips. I never asked anyone to post the footage. I requested that my parents' faces not be shared without permission. But Margaret had invited local reporters and society writers because she wanted publicity for the Vaughn wedding of the year. Those same people now had front-row seats to its collapse. A reporter approached Evelyn and asked whether the foundation would investigate the expenses. Evelyn announced that all reimbursements related to the event were suspended pending an emergency board meeting. 2 major donors stood beside her. One paused a $200,000 pledge until the organization produced complete records. Another said he did not donate to institutions run by people who ranked families according to social usefulness. Daniel blamed me for the withdrawals. Victor interrupted him. Your mother's behavior caused this. Your approval made you part of it. Olivia merely turned on the lights. Daniel argued that a husband should protect his mother from public humiliation. Why didn't that principle apply when she humiliated mine? I asked. Once again, silence answered for him. Mara directed staff to remove the head table. Several guests helped carry chairs. My relatives moved the small kitchen side table into the center of the ballroom so everyone could see how degrading the arrangement had been. Servers who had spent the morning receiving Margaret's orders watched from the edges. The banquet captain asked whether I intended to continue the meal. I said yes, but only after every worker had been offered food during the break. Margaret had instructed the caterer that staff were not to eat until guests departed because she did not want uniforms visible in reception photographs. I canceled that instruction. The atmosphere changed once the original seating arrangement disappeared. Guests moved between tables. My relatives were invited forward by people they had never met. The state senator Margaret had placed at table 1 approached my father and explained that his company once repaired the heating system at a veterans center without charging labor. A hospital executive remembered receiving a blanket made by my mother's church group during chemotherapy treatment. Margaret had classified my parents as unimportant because she recognized influence only when it came with a title. The room began revealing a quieter kind of influence she had failed to see. I returned to the microphone. Anyone uncomfortable with the changed event was free to leave. The food and music would continue. Wedding gifts would be returned unless guests chose to convert them into donations for the Carter Skilled Trades and Hospitality Scholarship. The fund would support technical certification, culinary training, hotel management, and other careers too often treated as invisible by the people benefiting from their labor. My father protested that he did not need his name on anything. That's exactly why it belongs there, I told him. More than half of Daniel's relatives stayed. Some apologized to my parents. Others admitted Margaret had pressured them for years to maintain appearances. A few left with her, loudly declaring that I had no class. Their departure created room for banquet workers to join the final course. The band played my parents' favorite song. I danced with my father, not as a bride pretending the day had gone as planned, but as a daughter honoring the man who had never asked her to become smaller. Daniel remained near the entrance for almost an hour. He approached me twice. The first time, he asked me to stop the live stream. The second time, he asked whether I understood how the scandal could affect his foundation position. Neither conversation began with an apology to my parents. When he finally left, he walked beside Margaret. That image hurt more than returning the ring. Even after everything had been exposed, he chose the person demanding loyalty over the person asking for integrity. By the end of dinner, the scholarship had received $41,600 in pledges. Near midnight, my mother and I stood beside the kitchen doors where her table had originally been placed. "Do you regret canceling the wedding?" she asked. I looked across the room at guests helping staff stack chairs. "I regret needing a microphone to learn who Daniel was," I said. "I don't regret listening once he showed me." I slept less than 2 hours at my parents' house. At 6:12 the next morning, my phone began vibrating non-stop. The first video posted by a guest had received more than 300,000 views. By 8 o'clock, local news pages were sharing clips under headlines about a bride canceling her wedding after her parents were seated beside the kitchen. The most widely shared moment did not show me returning the ring. It showed my mother telling Margaret, "We know how to treat people kindly." That sentence traveled farther than any angry speech could have. Not everyone supported me. Some accused me of planning the humiliation for attention. Others argued that family disputes should remain private. A few said I should have quietly moved my parents and continued the wedding. But thousands recognized the pattern. They shared stories about being hidden at graduations, excluded from photographs, mocked for accents, or treated as inferior by wealthier relatives. The video became bigger than one seating chart. It represented every moment someone had been told to preserve peace by swallowing disrespect. At 8:40, Evelyn Price released a statement announcing an independent review of the Vaughn Family Foundation's event spending. At 9:15, Victor called my father and apologized without making excuses. He admitted that he had allowed Margaret to dominate their social life because confronting her was exhausting. His silence had enabled the same behavior he now condemned in Daniel. Victor said the foundation's preliminary audit had uncovered more than the $18,000 he mentioned. Margaret had classified public relations photography, transportation, guest gifts, and hotel suites as donor development expenses. The total under review exceeded $63,000. The foundation had a legitimate mission and had helped many people, making the suspected misuse even worse. Victor temporarily stepped down from the board to avoid influencing the investigation. Daniel was removed as legal advisor because he had reviewed reimbursement documents linked to the wedding. He claimed he had not examined the details, but the board determined that his involvement created a conflict of interest. None of that happened because I invented a scandal. It happened because documents existed, and the public confrontation stopped them from being quietly explained away. At 10:03, Daniel arrived at my parents' house. He wore the same suit, though his jacket was wrinkled and his tie was gone. My father asked whether I wanted him turned away. I said no. Part of me needed to hear what Daniel would say when there were no guests or microphones. He entered the kitchen and said everything had spiraled out of control. The foundation might collapse, clients were calling, and Margaret had locked herself in her bedroom. After several minutes, he still had not mentioned my parents. "Why are you here?" I asked. He said we needed to issue a joint statement explaining that the seating arrangement was an unfortunate misunderstanding and that I had reacted under emotional pressure. In return, his family would not pursue legal action over the videos or reputational damage. My mother left the kitchen because she did not trust herself to stay silent. My father remained beside me. I asked whether I had misunderstood the email he sent. Daniel said the wording was careless. I asked whether Margaret's statement about embarrassing important guests was also misunderstood. He claimed she was angry and did not mean it literally. I asked whether placing my parents beside the kitchen was accidental. He admitted it was deliberate, but insisted he planned to move them after the ceremony. That explanation made no sense. The ceremony was when the formal introductions and family photographs would occur. "Are you sorry for what you did?" I asked. "Or sorry that people found out?" Daniel stared at the coffee cup. "The two issues can't be separated." "Yes, they can. One requires accountability. The other requires public relations." He placed the engagement ring on the table and said we could still marry privately after the attention disappeared. He offered to move away and limit contact with Margaret for a while. Every promise had an expiration date. For a while meant until I calmed down. Privately meant without witnesses who recognized the pattern. After the attention disappeared meant he still believed discovery was the real problem. I pushed the ring back. His voice hardened. He accused me of using my parents as an excuse because I was afraid of marriage. My father stood, but I asked him to let Daniel finish. Daniel said no relationship could survive if one partner publicly exposed every mistake. I agreed. Then I told him no relationship could survive if one partner participated in cruelty and demanded secrecy afterward. He left the ring on the table and walked out. Margaret called 11 minutes later. "You have destroyed my family." I described what your family did. She demanded that I remove the videos, contact donors, and tell Evelyn that the foundation expenses were part of an authorized joint event. I reminded her that I had never agreed to present my wedding as a fundraiser. She said my parents would never be accepted in respectable circles after causing such chaos. Respectable people don't need to hide others beside a kitchen. Margaret threatened to sue until Victor took the phone from her. I heard them arguing before the call ended. That afternoon, Victor moved into his brother's home. He told Daniel he would return only after Margaret cooperated with the audit and sought professional help. Daniel blamed me for separating his parents. During the emergency board meeting, Victor corrected him publicly. "Olivia did not create the fractures. She made it impossible for us to keep decorating over them." By evening, Margaret had been suspended as foundation president. 3 organizations removed her from upcoming committees. The society website deleted its flattering wedding preview and acknowledged that its claims about the event's funding were inaccurate. Daniel's law firm placed him on administrative leave while reviewing whether company resources had been used for foundation documents. His career was not destroyed, but the promotion he expected was postponed indefinitely. I did not celebrate. Watching a family collapse is painful, even when its members caused the damage. I had loved Daniel and imagined children, holidays, ordinary mornings, and decades of memories with him. But grief did not mean my decision was wrong. Sometimes pain is not evidence that you should return. Sometimes it is the cost of refusing to abandon yourself. 6 months after the canceled wedding, the independent audit released its findings. Margaret had authorized or submitted $71,000 in questionable foundation expenses across several social events, including costs connected to our wedding. She repaid the money under a settlement, resigned permanently, and was prohibited from holding another financial role in the organization. No criminal charges were filed because the funds were returned, and the board chose a civil resolution, but Margaret's social authority vanished. Invitations that once arrived weekly stopped. People who had tolerated her behavior for access to the Vaughn name discovered they no longer needed her. Daniel kept his job after completing an ethics review, but he lost his foundation position and the promotion he expected. He moved to another city several months later. Before leaving, he sent me a letter. For the first time, he did not blame the video, the guests, or my decision to use the microphone. He admitted that he had spent his life managing Margaret's reactions and had mistaken avoidance for kindness. He wrote that he loved me but expected me to join him in making his mother comfortable at everyone else's expense. I believed his apology was sincere. I also understood that an honest apology did not require reconciliation. Forgiveness could release my anger without returning me to the relationship. I answered once, thanking him for taking responsibility and wishing him well. I did not reopen the door. Margaret sent my parents a handwritten apology after the audit. My mother read it and placed it in a drawer. She did not destroy it, but she did not invite Margaret back into her life. When I asked whether she forgave her, my mother said, "I hope she becomes better. That doesn't mean I need to stand close enough to be tested again." That sentence taught me more about boundaries than every argument at the wedding. The dinner following the canceled ceremony became an annual scholarship event. The original $41,600 grew after viewers began donating. During its first year, the Carter Skilled Trades and Hospitality Scholarship funded 12 students, including apprentice electricians, heating technicians, culinary students, hotel management trainees, and a single mother studying event coordination. My father complained that his name sounded too grand on the certificates. Then he cried while presenting the first one. Mara joined the scholarship committee. The banquet captain became an advisor, ensuring hospitality workers helped select recipients. Evelyn remained foundation chairman and introduced stronger financial controls. Victor continued supporting the organization but avoided leadership until the investigation ended. He and Margaret separated for nearly a year. Whether they eventually rebuilt their marriage was no longer my responsibility. I kept my wedding dress in its box for several months because opening it felt like touching a version of myself who no longer existed. Eventually, I donated it to a nonprofit providing formal clothing to women facing financial hardship. I did not need to burn or destroy it. The dress had done nothing wrong. It simply belonged to a future I had outgrown. People often asked whether my announcement was revenge. I understood why. Margaret lost her position and social influence. Daniel lost the marriage and future he expected. The Vaughn family lost the image they had carefully maintained. But my goal was not to destroy them. My goal was to stop participating in my parents' humiliation. The consequences came from evidence already hidden behind their reputation. True revenge would have required me to become like Margaret, to rank people, expose pain for pleasure, and treat humiliation as victory. What I chose was accountability. I told the truth, canceled a commitment built on dishonesty, protected my parents, and allowed adults to experience the results of their choices. A year after the wedding, I returned to the same hotel for the scholarship dinner. Before entering the ballroom, I stopped beside the kitchen doors. Servers moved quickly through them, carrying trays toward guests who rarely considered the work required to serve hundreds of meals. I remembered my parents sitting there, trying not to burden me with their pain. Then I remembered those doors opening later as banquet workers joined our tables as equals. That was the real announcement I made that day, even if I did not yet have the words for it. Nobody I love will be hidden so someone else can feel important. I did not receive the wedding I planned. I received something more valuable before the vows made leaving harder. I learned that love without courage becomes permission, peace without fairness becomes silence, and family loyalty means nothing when it is demanded only from the person being harmed. So tell me honestly, would you have made the announcement, moved your parents quietly, or walked away without saying anything? Have you ever been asked to keep the peace when what people really wanted was your silence? Share your answer, because someone reading it may need permission to choose dignity before another kitchen-side table is prepared for them.
Thank you for watching the emotional story from the beginning to the end. Everything in this video is fictional and created only for storytelling, entertainment, and reflection. We hope the message stays with you. Sometimes, the strongest answer to betrayal is not confrontation, but becoming so secure in yourself that the past no longer has the power to push